Okay, in what follows, I'm going to use actually the Chinese verb 说 to speak, and the Chinese verb 想 to think, as an introduction to what I want to say in this hour about the relationship between thought and language, or between speech and thought. Okay, so one basic question is, do you say what you mean? If you could, that would be perfect, right? That would be ideal. But most of the time, we don't say what we mean, either because we don't want to or we cannot. Is that true? Okay, so in Chinese, you have expression like, okay, for those of you who don't know Chinese, forgive me. 言有尽而意无穷. 言 is to words or language. 有尽, that means there's a limit to your language, but there's no limit to your meaning. Okay, so that's what we say in Chinese. Or you can say 笔墨难以形容. 笔墨 is your pen or your ink, meaning to write it down or to say it out. What you say or what you write cannot express completely what you think. Especially when you want to show your gratitude. You say 笔墨难以形容. That means I'm really grateful, but words has such a limit that I cannot fully express what I feel inside. Okay? Those are common expressions in Chinese, and this expression simply tell us that you cannot, or you usually do not say what you actually want to mean. For those of you who are interested in reading a more sociological perspective of this kind of discussion, perhaps you have come across a name, a linguist called Deborah Tannen, T-A-N-N-A-N, Tannen. And she used to teach, I think she's still in Washington. What's the name of the university? The one who is hosting a roundtable discussion. Georgetown University, that's right. Okay, so she used to be a professor there, but now she teaches very little because after she had written this book called That's What I Said, But That's Not What I Meant. Okay, in 1995, she became a bestseller, a writer for a bestseller. And then she is invited often to give speeches all over the United States. Okay, so in case you're interested in along this line, I strongly recommend you as a outside reading or a leisure reading even, because the book is interesting. Okay, so thought and language, according to what I have given you on your reading list, is one and inseparable from each other. Language is the formative organ of thought. Okay, this is pretty much the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. This is pretty much the Sapir-Whorf idea, right? Of course, it could be the other way around, because what is first? You have thought first before you say it out, right? Isn't that usually the case? You have to think of something before you can express it. So you can look at it the other way around also. So can you see this cartoon? Okay, Tarzan wants to meet a girlfriend, Jen, right? So he has many different ways to introduce himself. He could just say, me, Tarzan, you, Jen. Or he could say, you must be Jen, I'm Tarzan, it's a pleasure to meet you. Or he could say, okay, how do you do? My name is Tarzan, and I believe you are known as Jen. You can have many different ways, and then you can see, what you want to say, what you think you want to say is always not the same as what you actually produce. If you look at this cartoon, between peanuts, and say, I have a suggestion for you. If you cannot sell your novel, why not try a biography? Pick out some person you like and write his life story. He cannot speak, but of course he can think. That might be kind of hard. We dogs don't like anyone. Okay, so I'm just using this as an illustration. another one would be this. Just because those girls went away to camp, they thought I should miss them. Well, girls are hard to understand. And see what he's thinking. They are like cookies. Every now and then, I'll come across a box of cookies that I just don't understand. Okay? So even in cartoon, you can see a lot of this discrepancy between, or the connection between thought and language. So speech usually should be a reported thought. If you consider speech as a reported thought, then actually your thought will kind of facilitate what you want to say. This would be the reverse of what we just seen in Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. And Professor Huang Xuanban, a very famous linguist in Taiwan, in 1982, he has done some research about the Chinese language along this line. And in this article, he said the occurrences of same verbs are like the Chinese verb 说. After mental verb, such as 想 or 相信 to believe, 觉得 to feel, 希望 to hope. These are called the mental verbs because they have to do with your mental activities. Demonstrate the homogeneity of speech and thought. That means speech and thought are actually the same, which is a widespread phenomenon that encompasses all major Chinese dialects. So in a lot of Chinese dialects, actually the same verb and the thinking verb, the mental verbs, they are kind of similar. And if you read on, this was taken from your reading. Vygotsky says, speech as a position often deemed responsible for the cross-linguistically similar morphosyntactic behavior between mental verbs and verbs of saying. This is exactly the same thing what Professor Huang Xuanban was saying, except that they were 20 years apart. And Vygotsky was not talking about Chinese language per se, but Professor Huang's research is about Chinese language. In other words, there's such a similarity between, in the morphosyntactic behavior, in their syntactic and in their morphology behavior, there's such a similarity between mental verbs and same verb. And let's skip this first. So, if you look at the Chinese same verb, the most common one would be 说, to speak. And 说 could be used as a verb. And all these examples from 1 to 8 that you're going to see now, all these kind of 说 are actually used more like a verb. And I group them according to their syntactic behavior. For example, the first group, you have this example. All these examples are the meaning actually have more to do with the speech. For example, you say 口说无凭. That means it couldn't count as an evidence if you just say it. You have to write it down. Okay, the inference is that 口说无凭 is that meaning it wouldn't count if you just say it. For example, in the Western world, every agreement between two parties usually have to be signed in a contract, right? So if you want to rent a house, you need a lease. If you want to do anything, you need a contract. This is also very cultural because in the Chinese-speaking world, for example, in Taiwan, several decades ago, let's say 20 years ago, we Chinese people do not value so much about the written contract. We think whatever you say will be taken as, our agreement. And I can share with you a true story about myself. I came back to Taiwan almost 20 years ago. And when I was offered this teaching position, I was very happy, right? So I have to quit my job there in the States. And I'm taking the new contract from NTU. The dean called me and told me I was hired. They passed my application, so I would be hired. So I was very happy. I was waiting. That was like late of June, at the end of, no, not June, May, at the end of May. So I was waiting, and for 1 month, June, I didn't get anything. Until July 15, I still didn't get anything, and I know the new semester begins in August the 1st. So I called the dean. I said, you told me I was hired, and I was waiting for the contract so that I can book my flight. I want to purchase my ticket so that I can come back. And the dean just kept on laughing at the other end of the telephone. He said, oh, you are so non-Chinese. You are not Chinese enough. We Chinese do it by words. If I say you are hired, you are hired. Come back, okay? I said, no, I have to see the contract to make sure. Okay, that's because I have been westernized, or whatever. So that's what the expression is about. 口说无凭. That's nowadays people think you have to write everything down. Okay, but before we don't do things that way. Okay, and the second one, 能说善道. That means you can really say a lot of things. That means you have the faculty to say things well or to say a lot of things. 谈天说地. That means just to chat. 谈天 to chat. 说东道西 to gossip. Okay, to gossip. So you see all these kind of, okay, 说, you see all this 说 here. They are literally meaning, the verbal meaning is to say, to say. They are related to speech. Okay, the second group. Now, you have a different kind of 说, but they are still using as member. You have 说故事 to tell a story, to tell. So now 说 could be to tell, not necessarily related to just speak alone. You have 现身说法, that means you to preach, to preach. Okay, they are all related to saying, but they are not actually just saying alone. And then you have to persuade. Now 说 could mean to persuade, not just the verb of saying. Of course, you have to say it in order to persuade, but still, it's not just the meaning of speaking. So you have 动之以情，说之以理. Or you could have to scold somebody. You can also use 说. 爸爸说了我一句. That means I was scolded by my dad. Okay, I was scolded by my dad. That's the third group. And the fourth group, now it's no longer saying. You can, the verb has changed the meaning somewhat, and now it means how you are looked at. For example, 管人家怎么说我. I don't care how people say about me. I mean, I don't care how people view, how people look at me. Okay, to view or to look at. And then you have the fifth group, which has nothing to do with saying. You say 这件事很难说. Again, you have 说. Here 说 means to judge. It's not just to say. Okay, so you see from 1 to 5, the meaning of the verb 说 has weakened along the line of the meaning of saying. It's related to saying, but not actually saying. It could mean to view, to judge, which is not, it's more mental than saying. Then you have a very common expression, 举例来说, for example. 举例来说, I'm saying this by an example, and which is mean to illustrate, okay? 他在心里说, okay, this is interesting. Now you don't say with your mouth, you say with your heart. He said in his heart. So actually it has nothing to do with the actual saying from your mouth, from you are saying it in your heart, which means to think. And then you also have an expression say, 这句话是说, this means, so it's to mean, not actually the verb of saying. So even with the verb 说, you have all this kind of different meanings related to 说, and you can see the meaning is from the real verbal 说 to mental activity. You can see this change. So this you can just take a look. So if you have the magic verb, somebody says something, Then in the Chinese development, the 说 can be used together with another verb, 讲. That's also another verb meaning to say. You can have 讲说 together as a word. And this 讲说 is, okay. Then could be developed into another, like 听说. 听 is to hear. 听说 that means hearsay or reported. Let me complete the picture. Okay. So all this part, 听说 and 讲说 is still, they still have something to do with the actual saying. Then this group is changed into the so-called expressive meaning. I'll explain about this in a little while. For example, you can say 写说, 想说, 声明说. 写说 is, it's written this way. 我想说 I think. 觉得说 I feel. Actually, that 说 has no meaning at all. 觉得说 is just like 觉得. 我觉得这件事很好. 我觉得说这件事很好. Actually, they mean more or less the same thing. So the 说 there is actually just attached there to mark that it's something being reported. Okay? And then you have another meaning of 说. You can say 我觉得这件事 what is that? 我觉得 okay, somebody 好可怜说 okay, that means I think this person is pitiful. You know, it's she's in a pitiful situation. Or you can say 这家面包的东西很好吃说. You could also hear that. You have this 说 at the end. So 说 is no longer a verb. Now it's attached at the end as a particle like 妈 or 爸 or 你好吗. That kind of 妈 is a particle. So this 说 is now used as a sentence final particle. So you have seen all kinds of different uses of 说 from a main verb to part of a word together with another verb. To here, it's attached to a verb, but actually the verbal meaning is weakened. To sentence final particle where you lose the verbal meaning. There's no more verbal meaning. To finally, as a kind of epistemic marker, you put it after the marker for hypothetical sentence like 如果, what we have just talked about. 如果, actually you can just say 如果, but you can also say 如果说. Again, this is similar to this group in the sense that 说 is attached to either the verb or a marker to indicate that it's a reported thought. But the difference is, in this group, you are attached to another verb. But in this group, you are attached to a marker, such as 如果. That's a conditional marker. It has nothing to do with the verbal meaning. So why I group them into different slots or in different places, I'm doing this because of their meaning and also because of their syntactic behavior, because they are attached to different parts of speech to form different kind of function and to be used differently. Over here, you have seen the propositional, textual, expressive, etc. You don't have to be worrying about this kind of development. That's actually linguistic analysis. We are trying to group them according to their historical development, meaning 说 as a member actually begin with a propositional meaning. Those are used as a true verbs. But then when they are combined with other texts, in the textual, they have this deontine meaning, meaning obligation or meaning some sort of guessing, etc. And then the usage is spread out into epistemic meaning. They have a weak epistemic meaning and also a strong epistemic meaning. That means the meaning of the verb is now bleached into something as weak as a sentence final particle or as a marker attached to another marker to form another expression like 如果说, which means the same thing as 如果. Okay, so this is the path of the semantic change of 说. So 说 as a member syntactically it can co-occur with a model verb or aspect marker, and it must take either a nominal argument including sentential object or an adverbial complement. That's the first stage. And because of this semantic change, through this mechanism for the change, such as, don't worry about this term because these are pretty linguistic, but I just want to show you there are several mechanisms linguistically to make possible all the changes of the different use of 说. So you have all these options. What is reanalysis? So change in the structure of an expression, of a class of expression that does not involve any immediate or intrinsic modification of its surface manifestation. I can show, let me see. Okay, let me go through this and see. For example, okay, you have, if you recall the chart, from the propositional meaning to the textual meaning, you have X meaning a subject, somebody says something. So this 说 is a matric verb. It could be reanalyzed as V 说. Now the 说 is attached to another verb 讲, okay, 讲说. And this is through what I have just mentioned that I said you don't have to worry about. It's through the serialization and reanalysis mechanism to become 听说, okay? The following is just an illustration to explain why I made up the chart. And then you have collecticalization. Okay, let's skip this. For example, at the bottom of the chart, you have the hearsay going into the sentence initial marker, such as 说是民主, okay? 说是民主, originally 说 is a verb, but when it has gone through the changes into the second stage called the textual meaning, you have 我听人家说过你有个女儿. Okay, here 说 can be a main verb, but it's a reported speech. Now this 说 is reanalyzed into another sentence, as a, you can break it down. Over here you have a whole complete sentence, but over here you have a sentence boundary or a closed boundary here. So 说 is reanalyzed as a sentence initial marker. 说 meaning it is said, here said, okay, or it is reported saying this is democracy. So you have this linguistic mechanism to change the meaning as well as to change the sentence structure. So 说是民主, okay, this example. The loss of the subject identity leads to less commitment of the reporter on what is being reported. Because 说是民主, if 说 is a verb, what is the subject? The subject is deleted. The subject is deleted. And when you don't have subject, you have less commitment of the reporter on what is being reported. So this is exactly what we see here. And the speaker, due to the lack of direct evidence, in turn expresses his or her doubt or surprise toward the proposition by the hearsay 说. So hearsay 说 is no longer just saying, it's actually, it is said, hearsay, it is reported, because this structure does not have the subject before the verb 说. And as a sentence initial particle for counter expectation. So some linguists have analyzed this structure as a way of showing counter expectation. That means when I say 说是民主, it is said that it is democracy. It could mean that I do not believe that. I do not believe that. It is just what is being reported. It is just what is being said. So some people think this development is a weakening of the verbal meaning 说 to make it into something marking counter expectation or counterfactuality. In this development, 说 usually co-occur with a focus marker 是. Okay, 是. You must have learned the Chinese sentence 我是中国人 or 我是女生 是 is an equational marker, right? So, and sometimes it could also be a focus marker. 这件事是很重要. That would be a focus marker. That means it is really, it is true that this is important. So it's a focus marker 是 indicating the disbelief of the speaker about the event heard. So when you have 说是民主, usually you do not believe that it's actually 民主 or it is actually democracy. If I say 说是很好玩, or they have been to a picnic, 说是很好玩. 很好玩 means, you know, a lot of fun. 说是很好玩, that means I don't know. I have no evidence for that. I may not believe it, but it was just reported to me. This is kind of complicated. I don't know how many of you are lost. Can you follow? Can you more or less follow? Okay. Even for those of you who do not speak Chinese or who do not read Chinese, can you follow more or less the kind of development I'm trying to show you? Okay. If you have problem, just raise your hand. Okay. So we see the development of 说 from being a verb of saying to sort of a verb of thinking. Actually, we have this kind of metaphorical mapping. You are mapping something that is concrete domain to something that is abstract. Why is it concrete? Because 说 is something that you can actually hear, right? Think is something that's invisible to you. So you see this mapping is from a source domain, more or less concrete, to a target domain that is abstract. And this kind of mapping between two domains is called metaphorical mapping. So whenever you have mapping between two different domains, you have a metaphor. And from 说 to think, from speaking to thinking, actually is a process of metaphorical mapping. And finally, on the chart, we have the weak epistemic 说 to the strong epistemic 说. That is, 说 is still attached to a verb like 写说, 想说, but actually 写说 is the same as 写, 想说 is the same as 想, 觉得说 is the same as 觉得, 觉得 is to feel. So actually you don't have to use the 说, just like here, when you attach to a marker 如果, 虽然, 除非, you don't have to say 如果说, you can just say 如果. You don't have to say 虽然说, you can just say 虽然. But still, it could be attached to it to show an epistemic, your stance or your attitude of what you want to say. So 说 as an epistemic connective becomes, you know, the meaning is becoming weaker and weaker, and finally can attach to an epistemic connective such as the one that I've just said, like for hypothetical 如果, or for conditional 除非, or for concessive 虽然. Okay, so you can attach to this marker. Now it's no longer attached just to the verb. Okay, so because of this development, finally you have the last development of using 说 at the very end. For example, here, 说 is no longer a verb. Now it becomes a sentence final particle. The epistemic meaning is even weaker. So let's look at the sentence final complementizer 说. Okay, here you have the development. Okay. Look at this sentence. It says, 我是觉得说这样不对. Okay, you can see the gloss. 我 me I 是觉得 is feel 说 the verb of saying 这样 this way 不对 wrong. Okay, so free translation literally means I think this is not right. I think this is not right. But actually 我是觉得说这样不对 you can also consider it. Okay, there are two ways to look at this sentence. 我是觉得说这样不对 This could be a whole complete sentence. Okay, you have the embedded sentence 这样不对 under the higher verb 觉得. But you could also make it into two structure. 我是觉得说呢这样不对 It's like a topic, you know, like could be reanalyzed as two clauses. It doesn't have to be an embedded sentence under a metric verb. And so originally if that's one complete sentence, you have 我, that's the subject. 是, that's the verb. 说, that's just originally a verb, but here I said it's just attached to a verb to form together a new verb. And this verb, the one marked in green, 觉得 is actually a thinking verb or a cognitive verb. It's followed by a complement to complete the sentence. So you can analyze the structure of the sentence as subject, verb, followed by complement. But then if you insert a pause after the 说, or even insert another sentence particle here, 我是觉得说, and then you pause, 这样不对. It could be analyzed as two different, clauses. So now look, 我是觉得说呢这样不对。然后 okay, the development of the sentence final complementizer 说 is by making this subject verb 说 plus complement into the one that I just showed you, first person subject followed by a verb of thinking followed by 说 followed by verb complement, and cognitive verb taking a complement such as 觉得说不知道说 and so on, share a similar paradigm with sentence final 说. So let's look at this. Originally you could have this way, but then when you analyze it differently by inserting a close boundary in the middle, this 说 becomes the sentence final element. It's no longer just the middle part of a complete sentence. That's what I'm trying to say. Originally it could be this way, but then when you insert a pause here, 说 is now becoming the sentence final complementizer. Okay, so this sentence final particle 说 could be this way. 我是觉得说这样不对. This was the sentence that I just showed you. Okay, and then you can reanalyze it. 觉得说 and it's reanalyzed as one single unit. 我是觉得说. And then finally, because when you are saying something in conversation, 我是觉得说这样不对. It's the same thing as if you're saying 这样不对. Because 我是觉得说 is just a marker to say I feel this is not right, but actually you are just saying this is not right. So the parenthesis means this is optional. This is optional. Okay, so you can see the structure from 我是觉得说这样不对 as one single sentence into this way, and then gradually change into 觉得说 reanalyze as one single verb, and finally 我是觉得 could be deleted, because in conversation we usually have this kind of higher matrix verb to mark as a way of showing your attitude. And this attitude is to show that I don't want to say it 100%. I'm just saying this as my own personal feeling. Okay, but this kind of marker in front can usually be deleted because they don't contribute a lot to the meaning. So via reanalysis, 说 and the matrix verb form a unit. So here, 说 and the matrix verb form a unit. The unit then undergoes reanalysis. 说 attached to the complement, and they become a new syntactic unit. Okay, 说 is attached and they become a new syntactic unit. Gradually, the absence of cognitive verb is allowed. So this 觉得 could be deleted. The absence is allowed, and 说 has become a sentence final particle that conveys the speaker's attitude. So instead of 说 here, this 说 could be moved to the end of the sentence, and then you have this sentence right here. So this is a very complicated development just with a simple verb 说. Okay, so you may have already learned the verb to 说, but you probably don't know the development historical of 说. And this is just some numbers, statistics to show you that we have done this research to confirm what we have just said. We have tried to find out the distribution from corpus. In terms corpus, this refers to the kind of study, the kind of method that I just said that you don't have. It's not required reading for you in this course, but that's the method we've been using for a study of this nature. We try to count the occurrences of each different usage of 说 as a verb, as a matrix verb, as a reported marker, as a complementizer, as a counter-exploitation marker, hypothetical marker, whatever. Okay, so these are just some statistics we have done, and we have seen that 说 is still mainly used as a verb, still as a verb, and only very little percentage is dedicated to its use as an epistemic marker. Okay. And when it comes to 想, it has very, very similar development. First, it's used as a dynamic sense, in a dynamic sense, as a member. So, for example, you can say, 他唯一想的出来的就是依赖别人. Okay, here you have 想 as a member. The only thing he could think about is to count on somebody else, to ask for other people's help. Okay, this is the member. But 想 could also has a deontic usage, meaning, for example, in this example, 他们想表达的即使不对. So here 想 is no longer as a verb of thinking in its dynamic sense. It has something with some kind of potential, and in linguistics we call it a deontic meaning, like has to do with obligation, necessity, etc. And then 想 also has epistemic usage, meaning 我想这种人现在可能还有. I think this kind of person still exists nowadays. Okay, so here I think this 想 is kind of an opinion, to express an opinion. It's not actually has anything to do with the mental activity or the cognitive ability of thinking. It's just a way of expressing your idea. So here 我想 again could just like the 说, it could be taken out in conversation without making any change of meaning, because this is just to weaken your position as a speaker. Because in face-to-face conversation, you have to take care of the politeness principle, and you have to take care of other people's faith. So you don't want to say anything that's 100% sure. So you will weaken your proposition by attaching this kind of higher matrix verb. 我想 I think, 我认为 I regard, 我觉得 I feel, etc. Okay, that's always what we have come across in oral conversation. So again, we do a distribution, the statistic distribution of this 想, and we want to see this 想 is usually form a unit together with the first person singular subject or first person plural subject, and you can see most of the time with 想 it goes with the first singular subject, which is 我, because in conversation you can only think for yourself, so it has to be I think. You know, it's hardly you think or he thinks, etc. So we just do this kind of analysis. So 想说 is now used as a grammatical device. It's a grammatical device and enabling other minds to become accessible to the direct observation. So 他想说 meaning you are trying to report the content of his thought, and we also do some calculation in Huang Xuanfan's work in 2002. He has come across this number, like 想说 using as a complement taking verb. That means to report the content of what's being thought. A high percentage has been found, as high as 46.1%. So semantic change of 想is triggered by the interaction and exclusive coexistence of the first person and the second person subject. Because in conversation, you are dealing with the addressee, which is the second person subject. And there's an epistemic modality, and also the context would have influence on the use or on the semantic change of this verb. Pragmatic force contribute to the assuming of new lexical meaning in the grammatical path of semantic change. So usually it's because you have to use it in conversation. You have to take care of other people's faith. You have to be polite, and you don't want to be you don't want to show that you're 100% positive about what you say. So you are leaving a little bit space by adding this kind of higher matrix verb. So a parallel distribution has been found in Suo and Xiang. They all occur from a main verb to a textual use to some usage to express your attitude and epistemic use. So they follow more or less the same path. And language is the means for the expression of thought. You first have the speech, but then this is mapped to a metaphorical domain of thought, from a very concrete domain to an abstract domain. So thought, this is the key question that I have raised earlier. Thought is usually prior to speech on a philosophical plan. So if you don't have any thinking, any thought, how could you come up with your language? It has to be prior to your speech. However, as far as the genesis of linguistic expression is concerned, when we are dealing with the actual linguistic manifestation, it is only reasonable to postulate that speech is only likely a candidate of the source domain in the speech-to-thought mapping. So when we are dealing with the actual linguistic data, we are taking speech as the source domain, then as if it's more basic to the thought. So there's a discrepancy between what is discussed in the philosophical area and in linguistic analysis. So Suo as a basic vocabulary is a fundamental element in a typical speech situation. It's part of the basic vocabulary. We have come across the basic vocabulary or the core vocabulary just now. Basic vocabulary is Wiebiska. This is a person who has done a lot of research in language and culture. Okay, just in case you are interested, you can just search Wiebiska, Anna Wiebiska. She has done a lot of researches along this line. Basic vocabulary is the most elementary human experience, typically derived from the physical state, behavior, or immediate environment of man. This is what we have just talked about in the last hour. Okay, so language changes, and as you can see from the development of the verb "说," actually it's a process that we in linguistics call grammaticalization. That means the usage of one word has become weakened or through time, and it has been changed into another meaning. And this change will usually be accompanied by a change of structure as well. So basic concepts such as the verb "to say" are eligible for the process of grammaticalization because they provide concrete reference point for human orientation that evoke association and are therefore exploited to understand the less concrete one. So we are using the verb "to说" in order to understand the less concrete one, like to think. Okay, and this "说" has a Taiwanese counterpart, and if you speak Taiwanese, 说 is gong. We have also studies on Taiwanese, and gong is following a very similar path, or even vice versa. Probably 说 is following a very similar path that we have seen in Taiwanese. This is just to bring your attention. So the Taiwanese gong, as I have just said, the verb gong is like 说 in Mandarin. Now you can find it in close initial, sentence final, etc. Similar development as we have just seen in the Mandarin verb to说, to say. Okay.